Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah ta'ala, we will wait for a few minutes until people gather. Inshallah ta'ala, we're waiting for a few more minutes until the people gather. So hang in there. Few more minutes, inshallah, and we'll start. Okay, let's start, inshallah ta'ala, by doing a quick review of where we left off or what we discussed last time. By then, also, some more people will have joined, hopefully. And just to refresh our memories, because we did not meet last week. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin Nabil Ummi, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We, of course, we started with the the idea of how do we go about proving the existence of God, or discussing whether there is a creator for this, everything that falls under our senses or not. And we said that for our research, for our discussion, our thinking to be a valid thought, we have to restrict ourselves with the things that are under our five senses, meaning we cannot discuss the metaphysical, if there is anything after, beyond this physical sphere. We need to discuss what is only under our senses. And we also discussed that before we discuss anything, we have to acknowledge that we human beings are built with certain innate types of knowledge, things that are not learned, the things that you do not go to school to acquire, things that where the lettered or unlettered person knows equally. That there are certain basic intellectual rules that all human beings live by. So that, for example, the part is smaller than the whole. The idea of cause, that if there is an event, something must have caused it. If you see your cup of coffee on the table and it's moved from where you left it, you know that first of all you put it there, so it did not happen by itself. You put it there, and so it was caused for it to be in that position by you, and then for it to have moved, that something must have moved it. Whether it is the wind, whether it is the cat, whether it's the neighbor's dog, or whether it is one of the children or something, but some cause that pushed it to move from one place to the other. So these are some basic, ideas that the human beings has, that we need to start discussing whatever falls under our senses, so that we can discuss whether there is something beyond what exists or not. Is there something that caused all of this or not? So, and we talked about how actually science even now acknowledged that the universe has a starting point, and most scientists agree that it is the Big Bang theory. But the idea that the universe started at some point in time, this is pretty much something that is agreed on among scientists. And so we go back to saying, to the basic ideas that we have. If there is a start for the universe, and they actually measured how old the universe is, then how do we, we apply our basic fundamental rules or intellectual rules, and with that we say that if it started, then something must have started it, and that something, that whatever started it, it could not have been started itself, otherwise you're going to have an infinite loop, and that is impossible. So in other words, the being who's able to start something, is actually started started what exists. So so we're saying that that these things started by the one who's able to start, the one who's able to create. And we also mentioned that these basic rules that we have that are innate to the human being, and they're not physically part of it, but they are given to the human being as tools. How did they come about? How did the human being acquire them? All human beings, regardless of their location, regardless of their level of education, regardless of their race, ethnicity, etc., they all have the same tools. And then we talked about the universe itself, and that it is made to suit the living human being, the human being, from the point of view of just even the hierarchy of life and the laws of nature and how they function, whether it is the inorganic nature, such as the sun and the moon and the stars, and how they interact in the living in the universe, and the earth and the human being, and how they impact our life, as well as the organic part, which is the living organisms, and how they are interdependent on each other, from animals depend on other animals, that depend on plants, that depend on the sun, and that depend on water. And it's just a cycle of life that exists in a meticulous system, a meticulous way that really shows how that this is, it cannot be imagined. It's inconceivable for a human being to think that it was at random. So the possibility so we put these rules. One, we said it is the rule of the suitability of the world for the living of the human being, if we put the human being as the focus, the focal point, and the second thing is the system, what they call the fine-tuning of this universe to be suitable for the human being. And so all of this, we mentioned them as as a starting point. And as I mentioned before, these discussions, I'm really, I'm going through them a bit quicker just to present an overview, because the idea again is that inshallah ta'ala we'll come back to them in the detailed series if Allah ta'ala gives us the life and the ability. But we will come back to this discussion in detail, inshallah, as much detail as I can put in, and present them inshallah ta'ala with that, and answering some of the issues that are raised against the points that are made, because everybody who's around these topics, and who's familiar with these topics, know that it's not it's a back and forth. All you have to do is just go to YouTube, and you will find tons of debates and amongst pros and cons and people for and against, etc. And hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, with this the series and the next one, hopefully, and then we'll set up a way to all these changes and these debates, because just to prepare us in how to deal with the events or with the ideas, whether we know about them or not, how to deal with them, inshallah ta'ala, in the long term. With that being said, inshallah, now I will start with today. And this is a natural progression to where we left off. We left off with the idea that there is a creator who existed always, has no start and has no end. He's the most capable, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he created the human being and created the universe, etc. And now the next question that comes, is again, we are still discussing the human being, and even when we discuss the existence of the creator, we put the human being as the center of the focal point, or the focal point in our discussion. The human being, the suitability of the world for the human being, the cycle of life as it serves a human being, and we started discussing the life of the human being, how it starts and how it ends, etc. And we're still discussing the human beings, and we want to dig a bit deeper, because it takes us to the next point. And when I say that we want to dig deeper, is to discuss the human being in terms of the needs that the human being has, because we talked about certain needs and how the universe is made suitable for the human being. So let's talk about some of these, these needs, and how they are, let's say, what the nature of their nature, and basically what we need to satisfy them. So if we look at the human being, you will see that there are many needs that are natural needs in the human being that require to be satisfied, that require to be given something to quell them. So for example, everybody knows that there is a need such as hunger, thirst, the need for sleep, the need to use the bathroom. We find also certain needs such as or certain emotions and certain traits in the human being, such as fear, bravery, love, affection, stinginess, generosity, respect for arrogance, the liking to gather with other human beings. When we say a human being is a social human being, liking to be with other human beings, you find that liking to be the one in the spotlight, the one who is everybody is reveres and some look up to, etc. These are all needs that you find in the human being, and these are all emotions and qualities that you find in the human beings, and these things need to be satisfied. You know, I mean, we do go about the really our entire life, as a matter of fact, our entire life is spent in trying to satisfy their needs, whether these needs are about hunger and thirst, and or getting shelter, or getting emotional acceptance, or proving that we're brave, or collecting money and making sure we don't spend any, or it's a combination of all of them, because for all of us human beings are built with all of these. We have fear, and we have bravery, and we have love, and we have affection, we have selfishness, we have stinginess, and we have respect, and we have arrogance, and we have also the tendency to worship, and the tendency to submit to the people in higher power, and to submit to, or to believe, to recognize our incompleteness. All of these exist in the human beings, and the question is, how do we go about satisfying them, if really this is the nature, the behavior of the human being is nothing but for that? The way we interact with each other, the way we whether we acquire wealth so that we can feed ourselves, so we can drink, so we can have a shelter, so we can get a spouse, so that we can we visit each other, we interact with each other for love, for affection, for family bonds. We go gathering around certain people, and we like to be gathering, we go worship, we all of these things. Really, this is what all human beings are involved in one form or another. So if we look at these needs, these hungers that the human being has, you find that really they are not all the same. They are not all on the same level. Some of them, for example, if they are not satisfied, they lead to death. So for example, hunger, thirst, sleep, these things, if the person does not fulfill them, does not satisfy them, they will lead to physical demise, meaning the person will actually die. So they are organic. They are part of they're required for the very physical part of the human being, for the human being to function and to continue living. Yet you find other parts, other needs, are different from those. So you find, for example, arrogance that exists in the human beings, or liking to be with amongst others, or the worship, or the sexual inclination, the attraction to the opposite sex, tenderness. All of these, if you don't have them, if you're humble, or if you live alone, it's not going to hurt you physically. If you do not worship, if you do not worship, you are not harmed physically. All you are is just you are uncomfortable. So this is the now. So these things, when you see the impact of not satisfying them, only they feel discomfort. So if the person naturally, for example, likes to be loved, we like to be loved, we like to be felt that we're wanted, that somebody likes us, etc. If you don't get it, you don't feel good about it. You feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, it does not harm you physically, or that you that you end up having physical problems, or that you die from them. Worship itself, you have in people, for example, in under communism in the Soviet Union, Muslims, specifically Muslims, and even today, nowadays in China, Muslims are prevented from worship by force. So the fact that they're not worshiping is not physically harming them, where they are dying. They are dying, they're from torture, from other events. But the fact that they're not worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do not fulfill that part of the submission to the Creator, or to the Supreme Being, it's not harming them physically. what I'm trying to differentiate between is to say that there are these needs are, some of them are organic, some of them are biological, some of them that are physically, the impact of satisfying them or not satisfying them impacts the physical human being, while others might, are not. So if you do not go to sleep, at some point you can only stay without sleep for a certain period of time, and then the person dies. But at the same time, if the person does not get married and does not satisfy their needs from the opposite sex, it leads to discomfort, but does not lead to death, and or leads to physical harm. Many people actually choose not to get married, and they don't have relationships out of marriage, and nothing happens to them. Okay, so you find that the second type of needs, if we may call them instinctive, or they are part of the living human being, but they are not the biological in their impact. When you satisfy them or you do not satisfy them, it is not. They're not a. They do not impact the physical human being. Now, if you take it at the same time, when you're the physical needs, when you're sleepy, you are sleepy. Physically, you're sleepy. It's innate. It comes from you, from inside. If you are hungry, you will feel your stomach growling. If you need to use the bathroom, you feel the urge physically to go use the bathroom. Versus, for example, the liking to be the center of attention, the person that everybody looks up to, for example. That is something that does not stir, a physical, sign or something that is physical that makes you that. It is an emotion that exists in you that likes you to do this. When a person is arrogant, these things are developed not innately, but actually sometimes either by sitting and thinking about it, that I like to be this because this makes me feel, let's say, more secured, more, more loved, etc., or more feared. Then that's by thought, or by looking at somebody, for example, and you see how they are the center of attention, and then you are jealous of that, and you say, I would like to be like that. So in other words, an external factor, an external cause that made you think of it this way. The same thing with the sexual inclination. It is not innate that happens to you physically, but it is either it's stirred by something that a person witnesses, or by simply thinking about it, something like that. This is how these emotions are stirred. Generosity, the same thing. It's you're generous because either you determine, you're impacted by somebody else whom you've seen as generous, by some emotions, some liking to be generous, but it is not something physical. So what does that mean? It means that these needs are different. Some of them are physical, biological, some of them are actually not. And now there is, of course, the question is, how many of these needs, other than the biological, you can go through them if you wish, but how many of these needs are they endless? Well, in reality, if you look at these needs, you find that really they fall into three categories. All of what we mentioned, they really fall into three categories. So in other words, we're differentiating between what is actually the need, the instinct that exists in the human being, and the way it manifests itself, the way it shows itself, the way it appears. Because remember, we cannot ourselves think about the instinct. We do not see the emotion itself, but what we see is the impact of it, or the result of it, the manifestation of it, how it shows itself. So for example, you see that selfishness, liking money, to acquire money, to acquire wealth, to acquire power, liking to to be the number one, fear. All of these liking to be within a group, all of this serves what? It serves in the survival of that person. It's about you surviving and thriving, because the more you thrive and the more you excel and the the richer you are, the more powerful you are, the more people who are you think they would protect you. You know, all of this, you know, enhances your existence, enhances your presence, enhances your life, and therefore you you know, this feeds into your instinct of survival. You know, so the more you have, the more powerful you are, the more you are the center of attention, where everybody you, everybody compliments you. You are actually enhancing your instinct of survival. You're enhancing your chances of being of surviving longer and thriving longer. This is really all of the, so all of that you see, the actions of generosity, the actions of or the emotions of stinginess, or all of this leads to what? Leads to the enhancement of the existence of the human being. They are all about the instinct of survival. Now, and of course, you find that similarly, you have certain manifestations, such as, you know, the sexual inclinations, loving one's mother, looking, you know, feeling horrible, you know, when a person, a human being, dies. You've never met them. When somebody drowns, or when you see a child abused, or a you know, you notice that all of these things are related to what? Related to keeping the species, the human race, keeping the human race intact. And that like motherhood, for example, the one who she would actually sacrifice herself for the well-being of her offspring. You know, that is not for her survival. That's actually for the survival of the human race. If the child survives, chances the race will survive. So you notice that these actions, or these manifestations, they feed again in one major channel, which is what? The preservation of the human race. And of course, lastly, you have the idea of respect, and the idea of the feeling of imperfection, the feeling of that you are in need of somebody bigger than you, somebody more powerful than you. You know, regardless what that is, it is not, you know, that it's always more powerful, but it doesn't mean necessarily God as we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but anything, regardless how you envision him, but it's something that needs the feeling, the human being, to submit to, you know, to rely on, to depend on, to seek the help of, you know, to worship, to get the comfort from, you know, all of that is actually again leading to what we call the idea, or the instinct of religiosity, or the instinct of religion, that you the instinct of worship, that you are to worship something, whatever that thing is. And you find that most people throughout history, always, you know, most people worship something or the other, whether they worship the sun or the moon or the wind or the rain or the water, or they worship their pharaoh, or they worshipped, you know, whatever, they all worshipped God himself, you know, all of these, but they worship something or the other. And keep in mind, when we talk about instincts, instincts are again, at the end of the day, it's part of the human beings, but stirred. And when you say that they're stirred by external factors, or by the thinking about them, it means that they can be suppressed as well. So it is not always that when we say that you have this instinct, you have this need, you know, you're always, you know, it's always there. No, it varies. It can be suppressed by something else. So, for example, you know, maybe loving one's child, or caring about a stranger being, let's say, harmed, and that's part of the instinct of protecting the species. It might be suppressed by the immediate fear that comes to you, because now your existence is threatened. You know, Sometimes the idea of generosity, which is you're serving, you're helping others, might be suppressed by when you feel that, your funds are running low now, and I need to protect myself. This is something like that. So I'm saying this can sometimes, that one instinct can be suppressed by another. So when we say the instinct of worship, it does not mean everybody's going to be going on their knees and praying and making sujood and ruku'. That's not the meaning of it. It means that there is a need, there is a feeling in the human being that this human being is imperfect, needs somebody to guide him, somebody to take care of him, etc. And always that somebody is more powerful than them, and they submit to them. Now that feeling can be suppressed by something else. For example, by the instinct of survival. When the emphasis on money, like now materialism, the emphasis on the finances, and creating an atmosphere where you feel that you have to hustle all the time, 24/7, just to survive. That's a feeling. Whether it's in reality or not is a different story. But you're thinking like that, automatically the idea of even thinking or feeling or relying on, feeling those emotions that you need towards the worship and the submission and all of this can be suppressed, can be suppressed because of the pressure of something else. And this is the same with the others. So I hope that this is it is clear. So when we talk about this, by the way, on the instinct of worship, it is also when we also talk about the fitrah of the human being. The fitrah does not mean that you worship God. Or some people, and we will discuss it inshallah ta'ala in the detailed series, some people when they come to the hadith, every human being is created on fitrah, and kullu mawlud, every born is born on fitrah, and the parents make him a Christian or a Jew, and then the assumption, some people explain it as therefore you were born a Muslim, and this is actually not the meaning of fitrah. And the definition of the hadith in this way is wrong, and we'll come to it inshallah ta'ala as I said in details. But the fitrah here is just the inclination, the feeling that exists in the human being to want to worship, to be ready for whatever God subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends, and etc. So it's just the readiness, the wanting to, but it is not more than that. And again, we will discuss it inshallah ta'ala in detail. Now, some people, by the way, deny this. Some people, especially like now some atheists and materialists, Darwinians, they deny, some of them deny the idea of the fitrah altogether, the idea that you are built wanting to worship. This is rejected totally. Others actually they put it under the Darwinian model that it was done really for the purpose of survival, that you only worshipped because as part of the group, and you are that leads to your survival. Some of them, they say that, for example, that this is something that your mother taught you so that you can survive. And for example, take Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, in his book In the God Delusion, says that this is taken from parents as it helps to survive. So he views the parents teach their children to worship, and that it helps them to survive. I'm not going to argue with it now, but just presenting it as people. Now, when people asked him, well, okay, if so, this belief, this feeling that you need, that you rely on somebody stronger, something bigger than you, the feeling that you need to submit to somebody, worship, that you're incomplete, etc. Fine. Your parents, your mother taught it to you when you're a little kid, you did not know any better. But now, how do you explain? He was asked, how do you explain that people actually, when they grow up, they reject the idea of Santa Claus, but they do not, stop believing in God? And of course, he had no answer, because they reject the tooth fairy, they reject these nonsense things, but they are not rejecting the idea of God, and they still believe that there is a creator, etc. How do you explain that? And of course, there's no in other words, if the belief itself, the feeling of incompleteness and the feeling of to worship and to submit that exists is a myth, just like the other myths, why wasn't it wiped out with the rationality that you have once you grew up, and now you can say Santa Claus not real, tooth fairies are not real. Sorry to shock some people, but tooth fairies are not real. So now at the same time, God, is still there. It should be a myth as well, But in reality, many atheists believe, they argue intellectually like this. Yet at the same time, look at the same person. If we take Dawkins, he said that you actually, there is a need, there is a feeling in it. So in a debate he had with John Lennox, and it was called the God delusion debate. It's a very interesting debate. You can find it on YouTube. So in the God delusion debate, Richard Dawkins said, quote unquote, when you consider the beauty of the world and you wonder how it came to be what it is, you're naturally overwhelmed with a feeling of awe, a feeling of admiration, and you almost feel a desire to worship something. I feel this. He's talking about himself. I feel this. I recognize that other scientists feel this. Einstein felt it, end of quote. So he is saying that this feeling, you look at the world, the complexity of the world and the beauty of it. And the idea of beauty is a separate subject in itself. But you look at the world and you look at its beauty, you almost feel, he says, you almost feel a desire, but then he confirms it. He said, I feel it. I feel this. I recognize that other scientists feel this. Einstein felt it. Sam Harris, the one who wrote the book End of Faith, he introduced in his book Waking Up a spiritual guide without religion. Well, if you don't need a religion because you already did what End of Faith, you wiped it out. Why do I need a spiritual guide? What does that satisfy in me if it is not religiosity, if it is not something that, the belonging of, or the submission to the Creator, having a connection with the metaphysical, what does that do? As a matter of fact, BBC News reported that, and under their title, what happens at an atheist church? You have atheists, an atheist church in North London, is proven to be a big hit with non-believers. Does it feel like a new religion? End of quote. Does it feel like a new religion? So even now, atheists, you have some atheists, I mean, not all of them, but you have, if Sam Harris, if Richard Dawkins are talking about spirituality, talking about being awe and almost believe, I don't know if you can get more of them out of them than that, but I think this is plenty. Now, if you have atheists who are starting, churches, to places of quote unquote spiritual gatherings, but they're not. It's not a religion. I don't understand what that does, because gatherings, if you're talking about just being together, you can do that in a pub, in a bar. You can go do that in a soccer stadium or something. You don't have to go in a place that is quote unquote for spiritual, whatever that means. But what does it satisfy? That's the question, And so really, in a way, intellectually or verbally, they say that it's not there, but at the same time, they're saying that they feel it. They feel that there is that instinct of religion or instinct to worship, that the drive that pushes you to worship, or to submit to the Creator, etc. To feel that there is something more than that, and that is what we said, what the instinct of religion or the nature is all about. So now let's go back to our instinct and organic needs. And why am I mentioning them like that? Because the point here is that if they need to be satisfied, and I hinted a little bit that they can be at conflict, they can be at odds at sometimes. The question is not whether the human being can come up with a set of laws and says, here, you go with it. The question is whether they can come up with a balanced set of laws that satisfy all of these needs that the human being has without satisfying one at the expense of another. We all agree, without discussing any system, if one of them overcomes the others, that is going to create an imbalance in the society. So for example, if we focus on one instinct, the instinct of survival, and part of it is the love for wealth and possession and making yourself stronger, etc., immediately acts of injustice will increase, crime will increase, because again, as they say, I am after satisfying number one. So if I am number one and the whole world comes, by any means necessary, then it becomes a more than the Wild West. It's just every person for their own at the expense of the others. So if you put that, if you make that as the cornerstone for your satisfaction, that is what you're going to create: a very selfish, self-centered, a human being who does not care much about the injustice they inflict on others, the pain that in other words, what is being sacrificed here is the instinct to protect the species, to protect the others, and at the same time, for the expense of one. The same thing, if you deprive the human being from that and you say, no, it is not you that matters really, it's the collective, meaning it's the species, the human race, the society at large, not you alone. So we are going to deprive you from certain things that you feel that you need. How is that going to be helpful? Because now that person, again, we're talking about the comfort and the tranquility and the peace that the human being is supposed to have. Then how can they feel that if they are not satisfied? If they feel that there is an urge in them that is not satisfied, So the point here is that it is they have to be satisfied in a balanced way. But we're faced here with a problem, and the problem we're facing here is that how can we even come up with a balance if we cannot even measure them? How can I measure these instincts and these emotions and these needs that exist in the human beings? And are they all the same in every human being? You find one human being somehow much more generous than another. That one person is just counting pennies and making sure that every penny counts, and I can't give anything, and the other one says, here, no problem. One person is you'll have to drag them to pray, and the other person loves to pray. How do you measure the strength of each? How do you come up with a system like that? In other words, we are not able, those instincts themselves are not even under our senses. For us to even think about them. These, what's under our senses is their manifestations. So not even the instincts. But those manifestations vary from one person to the other. They get suppressed by one, or because of the other circumstances, the mood of the day. There's no dipstick to measure each one to say, okay, now we hit the 50 mark, assuming that the 50% mark is the right measure. So when I say create a balance, I don't mean 50-50. So you worship one a little bit, and you abuse a little bit, and you do this a little bit, and that's not the meaning. The meaning is to come up with a way that actually satisfies the individual, satisfies the group, the at large, without sacrificing one need for the other. But again, the problem we run into is that we cannot measure these instincts, and because they're not under our senses. So and of course it cannot be an emotional reaction. Let them do what they like. Let them do what well, this person likes it, let them do what they like. Who can we, that's an emotional reaction. It is not it's not an intellectual, and even the mind again has its limits. So we in reality we cannot come up with a balance for such a set of needs that the human being has. Now we talked, and I'll give an example. We talked about the instinct of the survival and protecting the species and the human race, and so okay, the human being is built to go after, look after their own interests and their own, what satisfies them and what makes them prosper and what makes them stronger, what enhances their survival, etc., etc. That's very good. But at the same time, we're also built to care about others and to how others are how are we doing? Because we feel bad when somebody's suffering. As a matter of fact, sometimes people sacrifice their own lives to protect a total stranger. So I'm saying that we have both needs, both emotions, both instincts, are in the human being. So how are you going to make that? How are you going to satisfy both? How are you going to make a law? So, for example, take one example: the idea of ownership. The idea of ownership, al-mulkiyya. The idea of ownership, for example, in capitalism, because these people, they came up with systems to satisfy the need of the human being. The capitalism came up with an idea about ownership, that you basically can own unrestrictedly. You can. There is no limits on ownership, and the only factor that determines how you acquire wealth is the price, or how you acquire benefits. In other words, how consumers get access to products and services by the price. So the price is the organizer, the sole organizer. They say economics 101. The price is the sole organizer for the products and services that you acquire. That's fine. But how about if somebody who does not have the price? Then you suffer. How about if somebody who is born disabled? Then you suffer because you don't have the price. You're not able to, produce to get that product or service. How about if the person has an accident? Then tough luck, because in reality now you are not able to produce it. Then you're not able to get it. By the way, nowadays and you see this, even though we're not living under, the West is not living under pure capitalism, and even in the United States it's not a pure capitalism. They introduced several laws to soften the capitalism and the impact of capitalism on people, because it's a ruthless system. If you want to know how ruthless it can get, you can only, all you have to do is just read around the Industrial Revolution and how labor was treated, and what kind of work conditions, and etc., etc. And then you'll see how ruthless it can be. Not going into even nowadays, so in the United States they introduced some things that are alien to capitalism: Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare. These things were added to the system to soften the blow, because again, you run out of a job, you are not able to provide, acquire services. So if you're sick, you need the service, the doctor's services, you don't have the money for it, then go die. It's as simple as that, because we already decided that what controls the ownership here is the price. You don't have it, you don't get it. So this is one that went to this extreme. You have the opposite of it is in communism, for example. In communism, they negated the right to own altogether. So the instinct of survival, which one manifestation of it is to wanting to own, liking to own, that was wiped out for the benefit of the group, as they say. So you can work as hard, the whole idea, you work as hard as you get, and you get only what you need, no ownership. You live in a place that's owned by the government, by the state. You breathe the air that's provided by the government, and you have nothing to it. And of course, this is against the nature of the human being, as we mentioned, against the instincts and the needs that the human being has, as we mentioned. Okay. Now, of course, in Islam, it came up with a different approach. Every human being in Islam, every human being has the right to satisfy their basic necessary needs. When I say basic necessary means, it means shelter, food, clothing. What you need to function as a human being. You cannot be homeless. You need shelter, you need the clothing, you need the food. That is for you. Every human being, regardless whether you're able to afford it or not, is entitled for that. Of course, the idea is that you afford it, you work for it, but if you are unable to, then it's provided for you. And at the same, of course, it did not put a limit on how much you can, possess, you can own. it made put a limit on how you can own it. So it said you can own whatever you want, but provided that you own it in the certain legal ways which Islam specified. And of course, even the wealth, not unrestricted in the sense of the types of wealth. So there are certain things, for example, if they belong to the group by nature, naturally, such as oceans and rivers and roads, and you cannot say, well, I this is mine. Why? Because this is by its nature, it's required by the group. But other than that, really, it left it open. So that satisfied the need of the human being to possess, to own, and at the same time, not at the at the expense of the group and the other part or the other manifestation of the instinct of protecting the species, which is allowing the others in the society to prosper and to exist. So I mean, just as an example, that when we talk about creating the balance, and this is really impossible for a human being to come up with. And not only that, to link all of that with the belief, again, and that's a different topic, but to link all of that and the way that we satisfy our instincts and our needs, with the belief system, and that cannot be put. But somebody who is who knows the nature of the human being, who knows the needs of the human being, and not only as, do I know my own needs? Do I know what I want? Yeah, maybe now I think I do. 5 minutes later, I might change my mind. Tomorrow, I might put one ahead of the other. This is the nature of the human being. We don't know really what is best for us. And when we talk about a system that makes a human being with all of the complexities, in terms of the nature, that when I say the nature, I don't mean just the instinct of worship. I mean this nature of the human being, of being somebody who is after the instinct of with the need to survive, and the need to let the human race continue and thrive and worship, and with all the manifestations that come into them and how they overlap and how they interconnect, etc. That is not something that the human being has done, is able to do. And if you notice, even in the most advanced nations in the world now, laws that are put are reversed, and when they think that there is this is what will fix this problem, you find them breaking something else, but all of this results in what? In misery for the human being, because the experiments, the social experiments that you're running, you're playing with the lives of human beings and the lives of the lives of the people in the society. So how do you expect that such a this does not have an impact on the people? And we can go through many laws that have been put in where they thought this would be tough on crime, because again, to protect the group, at the expense of the individual. So you commit a crime 3 times and 3 strikes and you're out. And it ended up being really very abusive to many people who did literally the same crime 3 times. However, they were light crimes, and ended up in life without the possibility or for parole for minor crimes. The way that the slavery was treated, the way women were treated, the way these, to say how should the human beings live, how should they satisfy their organic needs and instincts, we say that this has to come from somebody who knows the nature of the human being. أَفَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. That really, doesn't he know? أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ. Doesn't he know what he created? And he is the most meticulous, al-Latif, al-Khabir, the expert in what he created. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator. We talked, and we said that the reality of the human being cannot function without a system to organize all the needs, all the whether they're biological, whether they're instinctive, in their complexities, without coming from somebody who knows what these complexities are, somebody who created them. And that leads us, of course, to the next topic, which is the discussing the that system, where it's going to come from, meaning the claim of prophethood by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we want to examine the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to see where the law comes from, and also the next source of Aqeedah. So I have not looked at any of the questions. This is it for today, but I have not looked at any of the questions because I wanted, inshallah ta'ala, and after I'm done, that I address the questions. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, please feel free. I mean, I have my notes, but I'm speaking in a way off the top of my head. So if I misspoke, please correct me. I'll be happy to be corrected. Wa alaikum assalam. Do you call this fitra? I'm not sure, Brother Rashid, what you're referring to. Did I miss something? I don't see any questions except one question which I'm not understanding. Anybody has any questions or comments? The instincts, they are part of the fitrah, yes. So they are, when we say the fitrah, the nature of the human being. So if you're talking about the fitrah here is used in two ways. If you talk about the fitrah as related to the ibadah, as related to worship, it's normally you can translate it to the instinct of worship, the instinct of worship. But when we say fitrat al-insan, as how Allah Ta'ala fatara al-insan as a whole, you know, yeah, all of them are part of the fitrah. These are all part of the fitrah of the human being. How we are set up with our emotions, with our needs. These are all, they would be under that fitrah in the general sense, in other words. And that's why they are part of the fitrah, and they can never be removed. That's why they can never be removed. You can suppress them. You can suppress a feeling or a need for the extent of others. And normally now, under materialism, not just materialism, I mean, we are in under capitalism and under the materialistic life that we live. You can see which things that are highlighted, emphasized, encouraged, people are measured according to. You're not measured by how helpful you are to others, or how obedient you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are measured by materialistic, standards. How much, so they classify you as successful, not successful, based on the based on the materialistic gains that you have, that you've gotten, etc. It's all by materialism, and at the same time, that is highlighted, and the idea of materialism and the financial success is highlighted, and what is de-emphasized or suppressed in the process, anything that relates to religion, it becomes a personal business, not something to be discussed in public places, at work, etc. These are sensitive topics, quote unquote, so you don't get into religion or politics, as they say. So you don't discuss them, and at the same time, you're even if you want to pray, it cannot be something that impacts the work. It cannot, in other words, they minimize the role of that, and the satisfaction of the instinct of worship for the elevation for another one. So you're automatically, you suppressed one at the extent of, but you have not, suppression does not mean removal, and that's the point that I want to say. The question is, so the point is that instincts and drives exist, and that a system needs to satisfy them. It is not enough for one to deny these instincts, but if one is to determine a proper belief system, they would need a system that addresses these instincts and drives. Correct? It's not enough for one to deny these instincts. And again, I mean, I don't think anybody, the denial, as I said, look, one can be argumentative, Muhammad. One can be argumentative, and they, some of them deny them, like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, when they say this, but then they come up with stuff that really exactly the opposite of what they just said. That's just being argumentative, and then they go back and conflict, with themselves. But what they do is they spin it. So, for example, when Dawkins comes and says that this is something that is the religiosity is taught by your mother so that you can actually to help you survive. I don't know how that is, but they come up with an explanation to it, and for them the explanation is a matter of fact. I mean, I don't know how they can take that and prove it, that this is why how you got it. You got it from your mother and etc. How do you actually prove that to be a matter of fact, and that the purpose of it is for survival, even though historically many people, how many millions died for their religion? Not, they did not survive because of their religion. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, that it is if they deny it, they deny it in one way and they prove it in another. The other thing is that they give it a different explanation. But if we want to, if one is to determine a proper belief system, they would need a system that addresses these instincts. Yes. So in other words, a belief system in itself, just to say that we believe in God, I believe in a creator, and I believe that we have these needs, and then we draw the line and we stop there, then really, okay, what have I accomplished? That belief system has to produce some way for what it just acknowledged. You acknowledged this nature of the human being, then now you have to provide a solution for how it is going to function. Otherwise, you are going to have a system that is not of the same, that's not resulting from the same belief. So how can there be a coherence? How can there be a relationship between the two, where there is the human being functions as one, because you function based on your convictions, and convictions come from your point of view of life and how you view life, and that's part of the belief system that you have. So that needs to result with a a system that allows you to satisfy them correctly. Because satisfying them, just the mere satisfaction, you can satisfy it in all kinds of different ways. The question is, how do you satisfy them correctly, and how do you create that balance where you do not satisfy one or the other? And for example, you can satisfy the instinct of worship, by worshiping an idol, by worshiping and people worshiping people, or worshiping, it can be done by in various ways. All needs can be satisfied in all kinds of different ways. Now, what makes it right is the source where it came from, and that's a discussion that, inshallah ta'ala, part of next week's B'idhnihi Azza wa Jalla. Any other question? Okay. Then inshallah and we'll pick it up next week, inshallah. And our topic next week will be the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and briefly, because we're going to come back to it, when we talk about the next series, inshallah. Just to continue with our sources of Aqeedah, and just like we mentioned so far we said we are using the mind, and of course we're going to go to to reach the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of course the guide, what controls our mind and what we can think about, what we cannot think about, is the nature of the subject. If it's under our senses, we have some information about it that we can explain it with, then we can actually think about it and produce an idea that we can believe in. But if it is not, it's beyond us, it's beyond our senses, it's in the metaphysical, then we need something else, and that is where the text or the textual evidence comes in, and that's our topic بإذنه عز وجل next time. طيب سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير for attending, and we'll see you inshallah ta'ala next week. Assalamu alaikum.